Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention? The morning's program will resume in about 5 minutes. Please finish filling up your coffee cups, move to your seats, and while you do so, please take a moment to mute your electronic devices. Thank you.
At Cox Business, we are proudly serving our armed forces with powerful connections that move your missions forward. Metro Ethernet, with internet speeds from 1 meg to 10 gigs and a wide range of access points. Wavelength services, delivering 10 gig and 100 gig bandwidth circuits with secure DWDM service. Business Internet, secure connections and faster speeds with managed Wi-Fi solutions. Cox Optical Internet, a dedicated secure fiber connection with symmetrical speeds up to 100 gigs. Dark Fiber, a dedicated fiber optic network strand that is highly secure and private. Look to Cox Business to help support your missions. Visit us at coxbusiness.com.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the U.S. Naval Institute and FC International, welcome to the final day of West 2023. We have just a few admin announcements this morning before we get started. Don't forget to download the event app sponsored by Deloitte. In the app, there's a session survey and an overall conference survey. We do value and appreciate your feedback, and we'll use it to make West 2024 even better, so please take some time to fill out those surveys. Also, don't forget to check USNI News and the AFCEA website for news and summary reports from the conference. And we'll be posting recordings and presentations from the conference on the West Conference website. You should look for those next week. AFCEA and the U.S. Naval Institute are grateful to Cox Business for their sponsorship of the upcoming keynote session. Cox Business is represented today by David Horowitz, Federal Market Director. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, please join me in welcoming to the stage Vice Admiral Peter Daly, U.S. Navy retired, publisher and Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Naval Institute.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us, and welcome to Day 3 of West 2023. It's been exciting to see the engagement on the floor and the engagement on our theme, which is readiness, capability, capacity. How do the sea services match up against the future threat? Key things I take away from the last couple days, it's kind of a Joe Piscopo list, is there's full agreement on the pacing threat. Effective deterrence and being able to fight and win if ordered they both require improved readiness, capability, and capacity. Whether we fight or not, we need to be more ready. We need to move with greater speed, and industry and the services alike really need to change the way they've been doing business to get at this. We can't have events like this without support. It was already mentioned that Cox Business has supported this morning keynote. We appreciate that and acknowledge that Dave Horowitz is here, who's that Cox representative here in San Diego doing important work, not just cable TV, but DISA and important military functions. I extend a special welcome to the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Mike Gilday, to Mayor Todd Gloria, who's here with us, obviously, and Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs. The San Diego Military Advisory Council has been here with us earlier this morning, and we acknowledge them, and I want to acknowledge Mike McCloskey, who's the chair of SDMAC, for their support in working with us on this event. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, a 1983 U.S. Naval Academy graduate and a 22-year active duty surface warrior. Secretary Del Toro has had many experiences that have shaped his journey to be in this chair today. Can't think of a better mix. He started out as the Naval Academy. He commanded at sea the USS Bulkley, DDG 84. I went to the commissioning. He served ashore as a senior executive assistant and director for program analysis and evaluation at OSD. He also served as the special assistant to the director and deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget. He helped there manage budgets for DoD, state, CIA, NRO, DIA, and the Peace Corps. Post his active duty service, he took the entrepreneurial challenge and set up his own business, SBG Technologies. And it's really great to see this person here today in his position mix it with all the small businesses that we have on the floor. It's amazing. In addition to his electrical engineering degree from the Naval Academy, and I looked at this last night again and I said, wow, I don't know if I could have done all this, but double E at the Naval Academy, holds a master's in national security studies from the Naval War College, a master in space systems engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School, and a master's in legislative affairs from George Washington University. Let's give a warm welcome to the 79th Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro.
Good morning, San Diego. I am no stranger to San Diego. I had, my wife and I have been married for 39 years, going on 40 here soon. We moved 17 times in 23 years that we served in the United States Navy. And I always like to say that out of those 17 times, the only times that my our four children, and my wife became physically upset with me was when we left San Diego, because it truly is an extraordinary place. And I'll tell you, as I sat listening to the mayor talk about the relationship that exists between San Diego and the Navy, it's extraordinary, and it's special, and it means a lot, and it just doesn't happen. It really happens because of the dedication of political leadership at the local level, at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level, all working together with our federal officials across the entire federal government, but particularly the Department of the Navy, to cultivate this really important relationship that doesn't just serve one or the other. It serves the American people. It serves the American people. It serves the nearly 1 million people that work in the Department of the Navy, civilians, Marines, and sailors. It allows them to do their job the way they deserve to do their job, with the support of the American people and the business community and the politicians and everyone else. So I can't simply say enough before I begin my formal remarks to thank you, each and every one of you in this room. You are the United States Navy. You are the United States Navy. The Navy isn't this organization that sits somewhere in a corner that you cultivate. This is your Navy. And you play as an important role in our Department of the Navy in supporting these men and women, as do I as Secretary of the Navy. So thank you. Now, if you're confused about what the Secretary of the Navy does, well, I'm sort of the CEO of the Department of the Navy. And you could say I'm the one who writes the checks for all those submarines and aircraft and everything that we buy in the United States Navy and Marine Corps. But it is actually the Congresswoman here who fills the coffers with the American taxpayers' dollars. And I want to thank her for her leadership and support of our Department of the Navy, because without money in the bank, as we know, you can't write the checks, right, Congresswoman? So thank you for all your support of that as well, too, because it's incredibly important to have one team, one fight. So Admiral Daly, thank you for your leadership, for your many years of service to our beloved Navy. You were my mentor in the Navy. You continue to be my mentor here as I'm Secretary of the Navy. And I often think to myself, how would Pete Daly think about this problem? How would he try to resolve this problem? And I'm a much better Secretary because I've come to know you. It's been a wonderful time here in San Diego, and come on, it's really not that cold in San Diego, okay? Goodness gracious. But it is a wonderful time here in San Diego so far, and I appreciate the welcome that you've given me and my entire team. Let me thank AFCEA and the United States Naval Institute for inviting me to address this audience today. It's truly an honor. I know both institutions well. I'm no stranger to either one of them, and the work that you do together in your own ways really makes a difference to our Department of the Navy. As both a former naval officer and a former small business owner, I know better than most the importance of these gatherings as well, too. West 2023 is a unique opportunity to bring operators together with the makers and the designers. We all share a common goal of delivering warfighting advantage to the deployed fleet. And I must say that I love the theme of West 2023, readiness, capability, capacity. How do the sea services match up against the future threat? Why? Why? Because this is the question that myself and the Chief of Naval Operations, Mike Gilday, who I've had the tremendous pleasure of working with since I became Secretary of the Navy, and I think he's done an extraordinary job since he became a Chief of Naval Operations even before I got here. How about a hand of applause for our CNO? And I'll tell you, there's very little light between myself, the CNO, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and I'm deeply proud of the relationship that we've built over the last 18 months. But that is the question that I ask myself every single day, and that keeps me going every single day, because there can only be one answer to that question. We must meet that challenge. We must be ready, we must be capable, and we will need to grow our Navy with greater lethality to meet the threat. Now, I know that the budget's on many people's minds, so I'll just say a bit on that right now. And then I'd really like to spend time on the progress that we've made over the past year and a half on a number of fronts that should be of interest to this audience. And finally, I want to hear from you and answer your questions, the easy ones at least. On the topic of the budget, I will tell you that I believe that everyone in Congress understands we need a fleet that's ready to fight at any moment. A quick look at recent headlines is enough to convince even the most skeptical that we need to be prepared today to meet the threat that we may face today or tomorrow. The budget is set to be released on March 9th, and I look forward to discussing it in greater detail then. But what I can do today is give you a brief overview of some of my top priorities looking ahead into fiscal year 24. Under my first enduring priority, strengthening maritime dominance, our top priority continues to be getting the nation's new sea-based strategic deterrent, the Columbia class of ballistic missile submarines, built on time and on schedule. Expanding the industrial base, both public and private, to increase our capacity to build and repair ships, as well as developing the industrial workforce that's needed to support a growing Navy. And we know that that's been a challenge these past few years. And hopefully, as we come here out of COVID, we'll only get better and better at doing that. Divestment of some outdated systems which are no longer viable in the high-end fight, including our older LSDs and some cruisers as well. And then finally, increasing our focus on cyber from a readiness posture standpoint and as a warfare designator. My second priority continues to be to build a culture of warfighting excellence, where everybody treats each other with dignity and respect as professionals should. At the top of the list of budget priorities are professional military education, force resiliency and mental health, including suicide prevention, recruiting and talent management, both military and civilian. And let me say, we've been at this for 18 months now, and I think that some of the efforts that the CNO, the Commandant, and myself have made in trying to improve our sailors and our Marines' quality of life are paying off. Just this past month, our retention went up 10% over what it was last year in the United States Navy and the Marine Corps. That just doesn't happen. That's real leadership across the entire chain of command, all working together to recognize that we got to care about our sailors and Marines, and that's what a lot of you do here in this room here every single day to try to help us along the way. And then finally, diversity, inclusion, and equity programs as well. My third enduring priority is enhancing our strategic partnership, and key in this area are our relationships with small businesses and small business initiatives across the Navy, and our relationships with medium-sized businesses, and improving our relationships with large businesses as well. It takes a team to make this happen, and each and every one of those is very important, and we've got to learn to all work together, to communicate more, to understand each other's problems more, so that we can get at better solutions for our Navy and our Marine Corps. Growing our partnerships with allies worldwide is particularly important, and it's particularly important in the Pacific. And I've devoted a lot of time, as has the CNO and the Commandant and the Vice CNO and the Assistant Commandant, and traveling throughout the Pacific, meeting with our allies and partners in the Philippines and Singapore and other places throughout Asia, so that we could all work together to create greater interoperability and interchangeability for our service. I'll discuss some of these in more detail shortly, but I wanted to state right up front what I know is of great interest to many of you. The members of this audience know all too well the importance of getting the budget right. In fact, I often say that the budget actually is a reflection of our core values. And if it's important, it needs to be in the budget. Security of our nation actually depends on it. The three enduring priorities that I just mentioned, and which I established early in my tenure, aim to empower the United States Navy Marine Corps team to do its part in Secretary Austin's vision of integrated deterrence. And as you know, we are being challenged both economically and militarily. In the past 2 decades, the People's Republic of China has more than quadrupled its export trade and used its growing wealth and economic power to rapidly expand and modernize its military as well as its Navy. Today, they have approximately 340 ships and are moving towards a fleet of 440 ships by the year 2030. The PRC's apparent disregard for the sovereignty of our airspace has made headlines over the past few days and weeks, but its disregard for the rules-based international order over the past decade or more is particularly troubling in the maritime domain, from the Taiwan Straits to the very high seas themselves. The PLA Navy is conducting active, aggressive maritime activities in the South China Sea that have the potential to undermine our system of international law, including the freedom of the sea, which is a foundational U.S. interest. Our maritime challenges, however, are not confined to just the Indo-Pacific. Moscow's invasion of Ukraine is bringing certain principles of modern warfare to light. One of these is that we need to improve our ability to go from peacetime levels of industrial output to wartime levels. And I know so many of you are engaged in that endeavor here in this room. It's tough. We've got to figure out a way to do it better. We've got to figure out a way to do it faster, to build more munitions so that we can defend our nation in the future. And Russia's aggressive behavior does not stop in the Ukraine. It also seeks to dominate large swaths of the Black, Baltic, and Arctic seas. It wants to intimidate any country that seeks to exercise its right to free passage. The United States Navy Marine Corps team is meeting these threats every day in every domain. On the seas, under the seas, in the air, and in cyberspace. I could not be more proud of our Navy Marine Corps team. To defend freedom of the sea, we must ensure our sailors and Marines have the capability and the forward presence to stand by our allies and our partners. That is why I have directed our Navy and Marine Corps to prioritize our investment and readiness efforts to make sure that our ships and aircraft are always prepared to deploy and deter our adversaries. Strengthening maritime dominance requires us to rapidly field the concepts and capabilities that create advantage relative to our pacing threat, with the sustainment necessary to generate integrated all-domain naval power as reflected in the CNO's navigation plan and the Commandant's Force Design 2030. We are making those investments now, guided by the NAV Plan and Force Design 2030, to ensure we remain the most lethal, capable, and globally postured force on the planet for decades to come. We're making those investments. And though it is still early, and though we face significant challenges, we are seeing some important wins. You know, we often tend to focus on the negative, on the challenges that we face. Every large organization that I'm well aware of has difficult challenges. But true leadership, and I don't mean my leadership, I mean our collective leadership, rises to the occasion and overcomes those challenges and works together to get us to a better place, even if not next month, next year, but over the next decade. We have to work together on these challenges, and we are making those investments. Last June, our shipbuilders laid the keel for the USS District of Columbia, the first of a new class of nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines that will underwrite the nation's nuclear deterrent out to the year 2080. The second Columbia-class ship, the USS Wisconsin, has begun pre-construction activities. These are significant milestones that should never be underestimated. In July, we commissioned the USS Fort Lauderdale, an amphibious warship that will help modernize our amphibious fleet and extend the reach of our Marines to fight from the sea wherever there is a need. I'm also confident that once we complete this year's Battle Force Ship Assessment and Requirement Study, we will also see a continuing need to build more LPD-like ships well into the future to support our Marine Corps and support Force Design 2030. What's more, the more recent redeployment to the USS Tripoli demonstrated the strategic and operational advantage that amphibious ships continue to have. In early 2022, USS Tripoli set sail on an independent deployment in part to test our F-35B Lightning Carrier assault carrier concept. During Tripoli's time in the Indo-Pacific, embarked Marines and sailors trained with and supported the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Ronald Reagan, amongst other traditional surface combatants. We also began construction on the Constellation, a new generation of frigates with vertical launch strike and Tomahawk missile capability to provide a lethal punch. These frigates are essentially small DDGs. And I'm very proud of this program. I'm very connected to it. I track it all the time. I've been to Wisconsin, where it's really cold, by the way, to make sure that this program stays on track, on schedule, on time. I'm also especially proud of the progress that we've made on the USS Gerald R. Ford, the first new carrier to be deployed in almost 50 years. And I can assure you, we are all taking the lessons learned from the Ford as we build the future USS John F. Kennedy, USS Enterprise, and the USS Doris Miller. Our carriers are not only vital to deterrence, they are also the cornerstone of our vital interoperability with our allies. These carriers allow both our warplanes and those of our allies to deck hop, something unthinkable even 15 years ago. This deck hopping presents a nightmare for any adversary to plan against. Our carriers are, of course, an asset to our air dominance, but they are far from the only one. Our most advanced fighter aircraft, the F-35, now brings fifth-generation stealth and multi-role, multi-mission reach and power wherever we need to fight. They provide long-range lethality. Yet we are still making the most of another older, yet still incredibly lethal aircraft. The F-18ENF Super Hornet will be the numerically predominant aircraft in the carrier air wing into the 2030s. Service life modification initiatives and capability upgrades enhance our inventory by maintaining the tactical relevance of the F-18 and minimizing the Navy's strike fighter shortfall. And I got to tell you, I got to applaud the San Diego folks here. I mean, to convince the American people that Top Gun actually is here in San Diego is an extraordinary feat. And I hardly ever tell anyone that it's elsewhere, shall we say. In order to increase service life modification throughput, the Navy directs the efforts at all three locations: St. Louis, San Antonio, and a recently established public-private partnership with FRC Southwest right here in San Diego. And I have visited, and the work that they're doing to maintain those elder aircraft and extend those lifetimes is truly extraordinary. We're working with industry to ensure trained mechanics are prepared to support induction schedules, and that they are bringing electrical and avionics experts on board to support Block 3 transition efforts. Today, the Navy Boeing team has delivered 34 aircraft with 17 more in the pipeline. Marine aviation continues to build capability and capacity in the image of the future force. Recently, we stood up Marine Aerial Refueler Transport Squadron 153 in K-Bay, Hawaii, significantly increasing the reach and sustainment capabilities of Marines and the Pacific Theater, exactly where we need it. The 15 KC-130 aircraft that VMGR 153 will bring by 2026 build on the organic mobility available to Marines during training in response to crisis or in conflict. We're approaching 1 year since the CH-53K program became operational and are well underway transitioning Marine heavy helicopter lift Squadron 461 into our first fully operational CH-53 Kilo Squadron. Despite their ongoing transition, HMH 461 is already making waves, conducting heavy lift assault support missions previously impossible with legacy aircraft. In parallel, the Operational Test and Evaluation Squadron, VMX-1, continues to push the boundaries of heavy lift operations. Just last month, they successfully lifted the U.S. Navy F-35C, demonstrating the platform's utility in conducting next-generation tactical recovery of aircraft and personnel missions. And I know the Assistant Commandant was here earlier this week talking about all the transformational things that the Marine Corps is doing. And I'll tell you, I couldn't be prouder of what they're doing. It really is extraordinary how they're experimenting across the entire spectrum to be able to bring the fight to our adversaries if necessary and to deter them from doing what they want to do. We're also making great progress on the unmanned aircraft front. Early in my tenure, we established a new first-of-its-kind task force in the Middle East at our naval base in Bahrain called Task Force 59, under the strategic leadership of the Chief of Naval Operations and Vice Admiral Brad Cooper, our Fifth Fleet Commander. Task Force 59 is rapidly integrating unmanned systems and artificial intelligence into maritime operations in the Fifth Fleet area of operations, and we will soon expand that capability to other regions of the world. Another area of improvement is public shipyard performance. Our significant investment in the SIOP program is modernizing our 4 aging public shipyards by optimizing facilities and infrastructure, as well as increasing dry dock capacity and capability. And I will tell you, I'm so damn proud of our CNO and the entire Navy leadership coming up with this, get real, get better strategy. This is what it means. Our dry docks are over 100 years old. Our shipyards, in many cases, the infrastructure on those shipyards hasn't been upgraded in 65 years. If we're going to get better as a Navy, as a military, as a nation, we've got to get real about the infrastructure problems that we face. So I've tasked my staff at the Department of the Navy to put together an infrastructure, a 30-year infrastructure plan, just like the shipbuilding plan, so that we can take a long-term, medium-term, short-term view on what our highest priorities are in the Department of the Navy, so that we can actually get real about the challenges that we face in order to get better. We're also looking at other things, such as establishing a parallel high-end technical track in nuclear welding, robotics, hull technology, software and electronics integration, and additive manufacturing for high-paying blue-collar career paths. And so as you can see, we've been really busy, and we're only going to get busier. But our accomplishments, our successes are not ours alone. We share them with a section of American society that is absolutely essential to our national security. You, each and every one of you, the industrial representatives in this room, and all of your coworkers hard at work right now, whether in the office, the production line, the shipyard, or right here in the exhibit hall. As I stated, enhancing strategic partnerships is one of my top 3 priorities as Secretary of the Navy. And you, our industry leaders, make up a huge portion of those strategic relationships and partnerships. Since I've taken office, I've met with many of you one-on-one or in small groups. But if you've heard a rumor that I want to meet with every company that contracts with the United States Navy, let me address that scuttlebutt right now. It's true, and I'll start here today. I realize that with almost 780 exhibitors present at West 2023 alone, that means I'm going to be pretty busy. I'll have my roller skates on this afternoon. But I will find the time because the sailors and the Marines I work for depend on you to accomplish their mission. And as I mentioned until pretty recently, I was myself the CEO of a small company that dealt mainly with the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs. So I know a bit about the challenges that you face, for example, what it's like to work with an organization that has just a little bit of red tape from time to time. And I have a particular interest in finding ways to make it easier for the Department of Defense to contract with small businesses. In fact, just last week, I brought all our contracting officers across the entire Department of the Navy together, the entire contracting officer leadership with my PEOs and my acquisition workforce to talk about the challenges that contracting officers face in working with industry and how we could work together with them to provide the necessary resources, to provide them more contracting officers, more training, to find ways that we could actually more effectively work together with the community. And that's why I'm pleased to say that despite the delays that the continuing resolution caused in getting off to a running start on 1 October, the Department of the Navy is on track to not only achieve its assigned small business goals, but also exceed them. And this after we increased targets for fiscal year 23 for small business primes after meeting most of our increased targets in 22. Just this week, MSC delivered with a $26.6 million contract and funding actions on a full and open competition definitive contract of Patriot Contract Services for the operation and maintenance of 8 government-owned large, medium-speed roll-off, roll-on ships. Some of you may already have heard this earlier from Assistant Secretary of the Navy for RD&A, Jay Stephanie, but it bears repeating here. I have charged him and his office with 3 initiatives which I believe are of interest to many in this room. The first is the Taxpayer Advocacy Program, and it's just what it sounds like. We want to ensure that the American people are getting what they paid for. This increased scrutiny applies to both sides. It's about accountability and fidelity for everyone involved, so I think it's really a win-win and something that businesses should be looking forward to. The second is contracting reform. This project involves us becoming better at contracting, faster, more effective, more efficient, and I think we all can agree that that's a welcome development. And third is continued engagement with small business. I already mentioned that we've notched our targets up a few times already, and we're also going to look very carefully at subcontracting plans to ensure targets are being met and meaningful work is being provided. In closing, I hope I've given you some food for thought here today. If you take away anything from my talk, I hope it is that despite the many challenges that the Department of the Navy has faced, we're making real headway, and as we are well on our way to even more progress in the months and years to come. The other takeaway is that our partnership with industry has never been more important. Our nation, and indeed the world, depend on us working together so that our security, our way of life, our future are assured. We are on this critical mission together. We must support each other. We must get real in order to get better together. That means getting to the bottom of whatever is slowing us down, whatever is keeping us from making the most of our resources, whatever is getting in the way of our sailors and Marines doing their jobs to protect us. We must keep working harder together to strengthen these partnerships. We must communicate and connect on a personal level, because that is how trust and teamwork is fostered on a personal level. I look forward to doing exactly that when I walk the exhibit hall here in a few moments. But first, I'm eager to answer your questions, at least the easy ones. I'll pass the hard ones on to the CNO. Thank you. All right, who's running the show here? And I don't just want to take questions from old retired admirals, you know.
Okay. Well,
I'm
I'm
just
not
kidding
old.
ya.
I'm not old. I'm 39. Good morning, Mr. Secretary, and thanks
Good morning,
for being
Admiral.
here. I have a suggestion, and then I have a question.
Sure.
The suggestion is, one of the lessons we learned from Ukraine is that when the government of the United States wants to send weapons somewhere, sell them, give them, whatever, you can bust through all the red tape obstacles to making that happen. And my suggestion is that we take that approach with our closest allies in the Western Pacific to help spin up our weapon production lines and force feed in this capability to our allies for things like Tomahawk, SM-6, SM-3, SM-2, and capture that quantity of sales to our international partners to help accelerate the production for ourselves.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, it's really important for our allies and partners, all of us working together, to sort of purchase the kind of munitions and equipment that actually makes us more interoperable, more interchangeable. And I believe that industry and the government is actually working far closer together today. There's been a lot of efforts, a lot of energy put into this by Deputy Secretary of Defense Kath Hicks and our Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Bill LaPlante, to engage industry in a very realistic, open sort of way, sharing each other's challenges and ideas, so that industry can then make the capital investments that are necessary in their own markets, basically, in order to be able to increase that capacity over a period of time. And there's no question that everything related to logistics and munition is going to be critically important for us to continue the effort in Ukraine, obviously supporting those brave Ukrainians, as well as the challenge that we face in the Indo-Pacific as well, too. Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you. The question is,
I thought that was the question. Okay.
No, that was a suggestion. The question is, Navy had a great ad during the Super Bowl for recruiting. And clearly one of the themes this week is that all services are competing for the same dwindling pool of qualified recruits. What's the plan inside DOD to help fix this problem? And probably it's a bigger problem than DOD. It goes across the river.
Yeah, you know, it's an all-hands-on-deck effort, and I need each and every one of you. If each and every one of you here today went home and thought about one person that you could help recruit into the Navy or the Marine Corps, I'd be extremely thankful to you, okay? I really would. And I've tasked all my general officers, flag officers, everybody in the Navy has become a recruiter because we all got to work together. And I could go on for 30 minutes just talking about recruiting and retention. But I will tell you, people talk about my experiences in 22 years in the Navy, but my experiences in the private sector is equally important as my 22 years in the Navy. And what I learned in the private sector is if you want to build a good company, you got to retain the people that you've got by treating them well, by compensating them well, by treating them with dignity and respect, by giving them meaningful work, by making them understand that the role that that person plays, even if it's the receptionist outside in the hallway, is as important as the role of the CEO of the company. And that increases retention. That's what we got to do. in order to, help our efforts on the recruiting side as well, too. But look, the economy is strong despite the obvious challenge of inflation that has had a negative impact on all Americans, including our service members as well, too. We've got 3.4% unemployment rates, and it's always traditionally been more difficult to do so. But we also have to stop bashing the military and those people that serve in uniform and those people who serve in public service across the government. For too many past years here, 4, 5, 6 years, we've been bashing our public servants. We've been bashing, our admirals and our generals and our people who serve in uniform. There's no tolerance for that. There's no tolerance for that. These are apolitical service members who swear an oath to their country, and we should defend them and the commitments they've made to serve our country. So that's got to stop right off the bat. And then there's a lot of other things. My CNO and the Commandant and I have initiated this 18-month recruiting campaign where it's all hands on deck to make it work. And hopefully Top Gun Maverick helps out as well, too. And Devotion and Greyhound and many other adventures that, Hollywood is doing to reflect the tremendous service of our past and present service members. Next question. I'm a little passionate about that.
Mr. Secretary, great to see you again, sir, and hopefully you'll take questions from retired captains. My question has to do with wartime material readiness, repair, and sustainability, particularly in the face of the workforce shortages and other things that we have. What are your objectives in the department at this point, and how do you see us being able to better leverage our allies to make this happen? My experience, certainly when I was on active duty, is there are lots of barriers to making things happen through the bureaucracy, to transferring money, to doing those sorts of things, to really leverage that international capability.
Yeah, and again, you sometimes hear the bad news stories, but there's a lot of good news going on here as well, too, that the CNO and people like Bill Galinas, NAVSEA, I don't know if Bill's here in the audience right now, I know he spoke to you earlier this week, have been dedicated to now for 2 to 3 years to take a look through P2P, for example, at how is it that we can actually measure the metrics that are necessary for us to get to a better place, and then make the actual investments that are necessary in terms of not just money, but how we conduct the business of repair and sustainment in the Navy and the Marine Corps as well, too. And we're all over it. We're all over it. Look, I've visited more shipyards in the past 18 months you can count a stick at. Just yesterday, I was at BAE taking a look at how they're doing their CNO maintenance availabilities basically on 4 ships that we have there. And they've been successful in actually getting some of those ships out on time, on schedule. But it also has to be a recognition, both on the Hill and throughout the entire community, that old ships need to be retired. That when a ship gets to be about 37 years of age or 35 plus years of age, it's like an old car. How many of you have owned old cars that you've loved your whole life? Come on, put up your hands, right? And some of you are being shy. Right? And your spouse has been telling you, to sell the car already because every time you take it to the mechanic for an oil change, it costs you $1,500. And you bring it home and you keep paying the $1,500 over and over and over again, right? At some point, you got to get rid of it. And you got to make investments in new ships, right? It's important. It really is. And the problem is that these old ships require more and more maintenance. And then the problem sets that you discover when you take them into availabilities and you open up those fuel oil tanks and you take a look at the conditions of the fuel oil transfer system, the lube oil transfer system, or the service system. It's deteriorated. Now you got to invest even more money. This is the American taxpayer's money. My job is to get the highest return on investment on that dollar, just like I did as a small business owner. So we have a responsibility to retire old ships and build new ships like our DDG Flight 3s, our LPDs, and many other new ships that we should continue to invest in. We have currently 54 ships under construction in the United States Navy. That's what we got to do to make them more modern, to make them more lethal, and to be able to deter our aggressors when we need to. So that's what we got to do.
Thank you, sir.
Kai Alberg from Washington State. My question is about numbers and mix. With the Chinese having 440 ships at the end of this decade and growing, is our goal of 355, 10 or more years from now, enough? Are we building enough with all the retirements that should be happening? And I'd also like you to comment on your view of the right high-low mix. The low end of the Constellation class is now over $1 billion apiece. Do we have the high-low mix right, or do we need more smaller, cheaper platforms to match numbers of our potential opponents?
Well, we need platforms that are going to maximize the lethality necessary to deter our adversaries, right? And I don't want to get into a long discussion about LCS and how we got here with LCS and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, we're going to make most of the LCS platforms that we have now. We're going to put naval strike missiles on them. We're going to employ them aggressively around the entire globe. But we need to be designing ships like DDG Flight 3s and DDG-X in the future, and the Virginia class and the Virginia payload module class and Columbia, and all the high-end ships that are going to be the most effective, highest return on investment for the American taxpayer to be able to deter the Chinese and any other adversary that we might have out there. And that needs to be the strategy. It's not just about ship count, you know. It's about readiness, it's about modernization, it's about capacity, and you need all three, unquestionably so. But the CNO, myself, and the Commandant, every day, we're challenged every single day thinking about how much money we put into readiness versus modernization versus capacity as well, too. And I'm thankful, again, to the United States Congress for the additional monies that they've provided over the last 2 years and even beyond that to provide us the means necessary to be able to continue down this path. Yes, sir. I think I see I have bright lights here, but I think I see a proud Marine there.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. I would like to add a little levity to this heavy-duty conversation this morning before we get too far into it.
I thought I was being funny.
No.
You know, when I became secretary,
I want to increase it a little bit.
You know, when I became secretary, my wife gave me some very valid advice. She said, "Honey, we've been married 38 years. I love you. You've never been funny. You shouldn't try to be funny. You shouldn't try to tell jokes." I said, "But honey, I'm the Secretary of the Navy. They'll all laugh at my jokes now."
So now I have to add a little bit of levity to it. My name is James Harkins, as you know, a retired Sergeant Major in the Marine Corps. No relationship to Jack Harkins on the other side of the room, a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. The only time we came in contact was with the dry cleaners, when they would give him my uniform and me his uniform, and I had to make dual trips back. I'm sure that he, being an officer, would converse with them a little bit differently than me, being an enlisted man, on how upset I was on making 2 trips. So now I would like to start off with the heavy-duty part of my conversation with you from last night, which I'm going to change to my question. I'm first going to give you the challenge. And the challenge goes like this. The Marine Corps needs 35,000 new enlisted Marines every year, not counting the officers, 35,000. We don't have a problem getting applicants. We do not have a problem getting applicants. We have a problem getting applicants accepted into the armed services. And it goes like this. When I was young, I had asthma. That's a rejection under the current physical stress system that goes on. Next, I outgrew asthma, and I was able to run 3 miles in 18 minutes when I first joined the Marine Corps. Today, it takes me 27. That's other reasons, though. Next thing I had this thing called, I couldn't sit in the chair for over 5 minutes in the 3rd grade. My instructor, she went to my parents and said, "You've got to do something about that. Cut out all the sugar." They cut out all the sugar. I still don't eat sugar today, but I have a lot of energy. Today, that same teacher would recommend Ritalin. That's another rejection at the medical screening. Next, at the age of 12, I fell out of a tree, broke my collarbone. Everyone here that has a broken collarbone knows that you cannot treat a collarbone the same way that you treat an arm, leg injury, broken arm, broken leg. That's another reason to get rejected. But I'm still able to do 12 pull-ups, but at 18 I could do 20. Other reasons for there. So you need to go back to the different secretaries within the Department of Defense and tell them to go to the medical department and start loosening up on some of these rejections, which are causing us not to be able to get the enlisted in all of the branches of the armed services, not just the Marine Corps.
Oh.
Now I'm going to get into...
Thank you for sharing that with me. And if you want to join the Marine Corps, I'll be happy to do a waiver and have you come back in, too.
Mr. Secretary, I have enough energy that I work down at MCRD San Diego talking to all the recruits that graduate from there before they go to School of Infantry every time there's a graduation class. But I'd like to move now on to my question.
Okay. And I thought I answered his question well last night.
Yes, you did. And I want to make it public today. As you know, we are going to have a conflict with China in the South China Sea. In 1956-57, we sent the 7th Fleet down between Formosa, Taiwan, and China because China was bombarding the islands off of Taiwan at that time. Today, we can't do that, and I understand that. But I'm having a problem trying to understand how we are going to fulfill our obligation under the President of helping to defend Taiwan. That's the answer to my, that's the question to you that I asked.
Thank you for that question, and thank you again for your service. First, let me say that it is not inevitable that we're going to have a conflict with Taiwan. In fact, I would argue that it's all our collective responsibility in the private sector, in the military, and all our diplomats, and for the President of the United States himself, to work towards not having a conflict with China, to deter that from happening, to try to make it clear to China and any other adversary that military means is not the solution to our problems worldwide. Our economy is a global economy. It's very well interconnected, and we should work together, actually, to try to come up with diplomatic ends, basically, that avoid conflict across the board. But it's important for us in the military to prepare ourselves, obviously, for anything that we may be called upon to do, and to build as strong a military and as strong a Navy and Marine Corps team as we can, so that China and anyone else understands that if they were to try to actually conduct military operations against Taiwan or any other ally or partner, that they would not win. That the cost of that conflict would be so high that it just doesn't make sense for them. So I don't buy into the argument that it is inevitable. It's not, and it's my responsibility, responsibility of military uniformed leaders all across our military to work together to build the strongest Department of the Navy that we can to prevent that from happening. Now, having said that, you know, the relationship, my third priority in strengthening our alliances with our partners across the globe, including, it's the same thing that Secretary of Defense Austin is committed to, as you've seen throughout the television, and he's everywhere across the world trying to strengthen relationships with all our allies and partners. That's the strength of our coalition. China and Russia have no allies and partners, and that eventually is also what will deter them, I hope, from being able to not do what they want to do. So,
thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
The name is Richard Pulido. Bienvenidos a San Diego.
Gracias.
Sí. For some people that don't know Spanish, is welcome to San Diego. Secretary, I'm so glad to hear that you're focused, working on the shipyards. As you know, they're getting old, and so I'm very glad to hear that. Additionally, I'm also glad to hear contractors that they're focused on training. But the question I have is, concerns me a lot, is the cannibalization of some of the parts for some ships that we cannot obtain with the contractors and companies. So I'm kind of concerned about the cannibalization. I mean, when I first came in the Navy in the Vietnam days, that's what we used to do. And now you fast forward, we're still doing it. What can we do to solve that problem?
Yeah, well, we could retire old ships and build new ones.
Yeah, but the
I can't make that more clear. I went on board the Germantown yesterday, and I'll tell you, it's as proud a ship as any ship as we have in the United States Navy. That crew is extraordinary. They really were. And they're trying the best they can to actually keep that ship in top shape. But she's 37 years old. There's a crane on her that actually hasn't functioned since 2018, and we've had the manufacturer, the OEM, working on it for weeks, trying to figure out how to fix it. Parts that just can't be found anymore because they're obsolescent, because they're not used on other ships as well too. So we got to get at the core root of the problem. When a ship gets far too old, when the superstructure itself starts becoming fragile, we need to retire that ship. And we need to use the Americans' hard-earned taxpayer money. And I cannot extend more thanks to the American taxpayers for their investments in our military services. It is really to be respected because there's lots of choices that can be made. But we have to respect that dollar and make the right return on investment. And that's about building new ships. So that's my solution set to that. Not to try to come up with, finding or setting up a company to find that part that we're not going to hardly ever use again. We need to focus on the new and not the old. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Usted.
Good morning, sir. IT1 Dill from NMRTC San Diego. As we've seen in your crane, the adversaries we are facing are expanding their capabilities to counter our C4I command and control systems. One of the biggest things we've seen is the commercial industry step up to the plate and actually been able to, on the fly, counter all the electronic warfare capabilities of some of our adversaries. What do you see being one of the biggest threats to our C4I control systems in the near future? And what are things that we can do to help enable the sailors to get the latest in commercial training? Because in the current fleet, training is one of the things we hurt the most for down on my level, especially with the generation of sailors coming in and the level of knowledge that we're listening for old school capabilities. Like long haul communications is one of the easiest ways to counter in the event we lose our SATCOM capabilities, but we don't have the HF operators like we did once upon a time.
No, it's a point well taken, and it's incredibly important investment for us. I didn't talk about it as much in my speech because otherwise the speech would be 2 hours instead of 30 minutes. But having said that, when you look at the capabilities that we've been bringing online in support of JATC-2, for example, and that manifests itself in Operation Overmatch in the United States Navy. Can't talk a lot about what we're doing, but it's significant. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually keep the Chinese fleet from ever getting in the way at the pier through our cyber and our space efforts? That's the goal. That's what we're working towards. And it's incredibly important, as important as anything else what we're doing in the Navy. And there's been a lot of investments made over many, many years, many administrations actually, to get to where we are today. And I think that some of those investments are really going to be paying off here in the next year or two.
Thank you, sir.
As well as the training of our personnel as well, too, in cyber. And you might have heard from Chris Cleary earlier this week that the Department of the Navy is coming out with a new cyber strategy that I think is going to be far more effective and is also going to save resources for the Department of the Navy to bring the highest return on investment for the American taxpayer.
Morning, Mr. Secretary. My name is Anita Gentry, and I'm one of the small businesses that you spoke about. I'm a grant writer and a fundraiser, and right now I am doing fundraising for veterans helping veterans. And my dad always told me to go to the top CEO if I would like something. And I would really like a helicopter ride to be able to auction it off for these veterans to help other veterans. My son is a government contract writer for the Navy. My uncle and cousins were commanders. My brother is a captain in the Marine Corps. I am also affiliated with the Border Patrol. So I would like a little help. I didn't know where to go. Your department is huge. So even if I could take your business card and show it to somebody would certainly help. It took me forever to get a flag from being flown over the White House for an auction of some kind. But anyway, us ladies came together showing you women force that are also working here in San Diego.
Well,
so anyway, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, no, let me take a moment to actually recognize the work that you do and the work that every other how many of you work in non-for-profits? Yeah, there's a lot of you out there. And I just simply can't say enough thanks to the work that you do. And I know it's very, very hard and the pay is low and The hours are long every single day, but you do it for the right reason, with the right passion to support our sailors and our Marines, and it's incredibly important. And I'd be happy to make a personal contribution. I can't fundraise myself, but be happy to make a personal contribution to your organization. So
I will come and get your business card before you leave.
it's a good small businesswoman there.
Thank you.
Outstanding.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one more question.
Which means we'll take 3. Go ahead.
Well, good morning, Mr. Secretary. Listening to you speak, and you have some great initiatives there, from debunking the, I think, outdated systems that you mentioned and building a culture of war fighter excellence. But the thing that struck me was the education of the force.
How about a hand of applause to Congressman Rosa, who has to go to another event?
Yeah, so I was mentioning the thing that struck me was the re-education of the military force that's currently on ground, which is you're focused on their mental health. So you mentioned their quality of life being increased by 10%. How are you measuring that, or how is the businesses measuring that?
I said our retention rates are up by 10%. So what we've done over the course of the last 18 months, and I would argue even before I came on as Secretary, the CNO and the Commandant in particular have been really engaged, along with the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps and the MCPON, have really been engaged in what's important to our sailors and Marines every day and to their families, right? So at about 1 year anniversary, my staff came to me and said, "Oh, why don't we put out a message about all the great things that we've done in the Navy?" And I said, "No." I said, "I want to put out a message that basically says, for the last year, since I've been Secretary, your CNO, your Commandant, myself, the MCPON, the Sergeant Major, and a lot of other leadership across the Navy has gone around listening to our sailors and Marines by going to where they are, not in the Pentagon, okay, to where they are, to listen to their problem sets and trying to do a better job. And what the message I want to put out is, here's what we've heard you say to us, and we believe that this is important. Here's what we've done to try to alleviate that, including one of the highest pay raises actually in the last 20 years, including making investments in DoD schools overseas, including trying to devote an enormous amount of time to the problems of suicide, not just in the Department of the Navy, but across the entire nation, because it is a national problem that we have to overcome together, right? By investing more, trying to recruit more corpsmen, turning them into professional mental health advisors as well, too, because that's what we can do within our own lifelines. Listening to their problem sets, making those investments, and making a commitment to continue to make those investments. And that's the message that we sent out 6 months ago. And that's our commitment to our sailors and Marines moving forward. Not just because we want to retain them, but because we care about them, because they're part of this family. Thank you. And I'll take one more question, and I know that we've got to move on to your next speaker.
Hi, my name is Catherine Carter from Tridus. We do.
That gentleman in a wheelchair can stay right where he's at. I'll take your question too.
I was willing to give him my spot. So.
No, it's okay. Go ahead and ask your question.
We do encryption of data at all levels of classification. And I just wanted to say I'm also an advocate. And I worked with the Armed Service Committee a few years ago on adding vision screenings to traumatic brain injury screenings. And to hear you talk about the health of our military, I want to say thank you, and my ask is that for you and your counterparts to continue to provide the needed supports and research of treatment for our injured soldiers with traumatic brain injury. So that was one ask.
Okay.
And then I had a question. So how do you balance the need to face new threats, especially with cybersecurity and cyber warfare, while still maintaining infrastructure and utilizing legacy hardware?
Yeah, so take a look at our cyber policy that's coming out. It's called Cyber Ready, basically, and it takes a whole different view of how we actually address the issue of cyber and readiness. And I think you'll see that we're trying to think very transformative about this. Our CIO in particular, Aaron Weiss, working with Chris Cleary, our senior cyber advisor, have really done a great job. And sort of rethinking the whole problem set so that we can get to a better place. On the issue of suicide prevention, however, and mental health, this is all hands on deck. When I talk to our troops, you know, I go on an aircraft carrier and I'm talking to 2,700 people. I talk about the things that we're trying to do, the programs we're trying to put in place and all those other things. But at the end of that discussion, I look to them and I say, I need you to take care of each other, to care about each other. From the first day that a sailor shows up on a ship, an aircraft squadron, a Marine squadron, whatever it might be, to the day that that person leaves. I need you to take care of each other and be sensitive and empathetic to each other's problems and challenges and see the warning signs that someone might be struggling, because that's what we need to do. We're not going to be able to compete. You know, it's hard to compete with the private sector for mental health professionals. We got to grow our own, which is why I'm committed to bringing in more corpsmen and training them as mental health professionals and putting more chaplains out on destroyers and cruisers and aircraft carriers as well, too, to be there for each other. So it's all hands on deck, and I need each and every one of you to help me out in that endeavor as well, too. Last question in the back.
Morning, sir. Steve Alonzo, Marine Electric Systems. Over the last dozen years, we've spent maybe 40% of our time on continuing resolutions. In the small business community, I've seen so many of my fellow small businesses go out of business or have to go into very high interest, risky capital. Banks will not give money or fund small business in the defense industry. And was wondering, had you considered some type of a DoD IMF type fund so that we can have lower capital costs and have a sustained source of capital to keep the small business in the industrial base? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And it would probably be very, very difficult to pull something like that off. I mean, our Department of Defense has come up with a strategic investment capital fund for innovative SBIR-like companies that need additional capital to be able to invest in those companies. And so that structure is being set up. But on a large scale, that would be difficult to do. Going after the core problem is actually, let's avoid the continuing resolutions, right? And let's have Congress do their job, pass these bills on time, come to agreement. You know, my favorite two words in life are compromise and balance. And I'm hopeful, and I'm very proud of the senior leadership of Congress this past year to actually get the National Defense Authorization Act and to actually pass the omnibus bill before the end of the year. I think that showed a tremendous amount of leadership on the part of a lot of our senior members in Congress, and I'm very thankful for them having done that. We need to sort of continue to do that on behalf of our national security, on behalf of all Americans. Yeah, continuing resolutions really present a problem throughout the entire range of industry, large, medium, small, and it prevents us from being able to initiate the new programs that we need to be successful to continue to build on our national security. So that has to be the solution set. So thank you. Thanks, Admiral.
Got a presentation, just a quick one.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Secretary, that was great. And I don't think I've seen a standing room only crowd on the third day, and you drew it, and you deserved it. We know your time is precious. We thank you for your insights and your leadership. And on behalf of AFCEA International and the Naval Institute, we want to present you this Naval Institute press book, War Transformed by Mick Ryan. It's also got an AFCEA bookmark in it. Sir, again, thank you for your leadership. And let's give the Secretary one more big applause.
Thank you. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. We also want to thank our sponsor, Cox, for this segment, their sponsorship. And this ends our morning keynote. We look forward to having a strong third day. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now move into a networking break in the exhibit hall, which is sponsored by Cisco. There's a panel discussion beginning at 10:15. Topic, do the sea services have the resources they need to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow? Also, like the last 2 days, there are presentations in the various theaters throughout the exhibit hall. Enjoy the break. We'll see everybody back here for lunch.